Hello, everyone. Welcome to Expert Saturday. I'm your host, Dr. Manjiri Narkarni. I'm an Ayurvedic MD, registered holistic nutritionist. And today I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Chelsea Dakers, naturopathic doctor. Hello and welcome here. How are you today, Chelsea?
Hello. I'm doing really well. Thank you so much. Lovely to be here with you.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting topic. So thank you for being here. And this topic is extremely important because with COVID, we are seeing that there's a sharp decline in the fertility rate and there are way more fertility struggles. We thought that having the time to ourselves, where we could kind of connect with our partners would actually help. But this has been way more stressful than we thought about, and that's one of the reasons why it's extremely important to talk about fertility in times of the pandemic. And you are talking about something very special that nobody considers, right? We're talking about whole person fertility journey. So my first question would be, what exactly is a whole person fertility journey and how different is it?
Mm, Thank you for that question. Yeah. So the whole person fertility journey for me, what that means is taking maybe a step back and a wider approach at why someone might have fertility challenges. So, in our vantage point at the Health Creation Lab, and from a naturopathic medical standpoint, we see the each experience as a cluster, and we can categorize in a few areas. So there's the physical, emotional, mental, and for some people there's a spiritual context. And so when we gather information on someone's fertility journey, we're looking at all of those elements. And so that's why we like to say something like holistic or whole person or full spectrum, lots of different ways to language it. But the fertility is a result of all of these processes coming together in a good way. It's very similar to sleep. You sleep because A plus B plus D plus C all added up to the right nervous system tone for you to fall asleep at night. We look at fertility the same. There's all of these things that come together to allow fertility to emerge. Fertility is a well state. And so that's why we like to take a whole person perspective by stepping back, looking at all the variables that contribute to everyone's unique health experience, because we can't just get tunnel visioned into the reproductive system. It can get very tempting to be fixated on solely the functionality of the ovaries or the testes or the uterus. And by stepping back, by looking at a bigger picture, we get a lot of clues about why things might not be moving in the way you'd want.
So, what are some common factors related to fertility struggles are you seeing because of the pandemic or attributed specifically to the pandemic? Like
Mhm.
we're having time on our hands. And there have been cases where initially, there was a little bit raise in the fertility levels or in the birth rates, and suddenly then there's a sharp decline. So, according to you, what's causing it?
That's such an interesting question. I love that you're weaving in the pandemic piece, because I think that's something that it's a great point of dialogue. So I love these specific questions. Okay, so what have we been noticing? I think that you spoke to a really important part.
And
We're
according to you,
stressed.
what's causing it?
That's such.
Sorry. I think another
I'm.
window opened up. Yeah.
We're okay now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So you had mentioned that we're more stressed than I think we realize. I think that that's a really important piece to acknowledge, is that this has been a really, really challenging time for the majority of people. And that level of stress, when we come into that fight, flight, freeze, please, that stressed nervous system, that completely augments our physiology in every system of our body, including the reproductive system. So I think that that's definitely a variable, that the kind of smoldering stress or even explosive levels of stress that people may have experienced in the last year and a half is 100% related. I think that that's a great observation on your part. And then Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because we have the opportunity to maybe create the space for more intimate connection. But I think what has also happened in this pandemic is a lot of things have been bubbling up. So what we're seeing is kind of this emergence of or more clarity in some people's underlying health concerns, and those can be major barriers to fertility. So what we're seeing with COVID is that some folks, or most folks who have very significant impacts when they come into contact with the virus, is that they're coming into that interaction with COVID or SARS-CoV-2 with a whole palette of health concerns. And so those are always creating the context for how that outcome might move forward. Same thing with fertility. People are coming into this their fertility journey with possibly multiple underlying health concerns. Maybe they haven't kind of bubbled up to something, you know, very significant requiring a diagnosis and treatment, but maybe they have quite a few kind of lingering health concerns that haven't been checked, and now they're starting to come up to the surface. Those can really interfere with the fertility state because, as I said, the fertility state is a well state. So if there's multiple things that are impairing some key physiology, then maybe fertility just isn't moving forward in the way that we would want it to.
Mhm. And that's a really great point, that sometimes they have lingering conditions, but when you're diagnosed with a certain thing, I think you become serious about a certain condition, right? Like if your blood sugar, for example, is always in the high risk category, you're still going to be like, oh, I can eat this, I can get away with this. But once you get that diagnosis, then you do everything in your power to reserve. But as you said, that well state is a completely different state, which is an optimal nutritional, optimal health state, right? You talked
Yeah.
about, social health, mental health, physiological health. So, and I think that's something that's lacking, and that's a very different approach, right?
Mm.
So when a person comes to you, for a fertility planning, like should they be planning ahead of time, or how far ahead should you plan a conception?
Mm. Awesome question. And I think this is going to be variable depending on what people are walking in the door with. So
Mhm.
let's say that someone's walking in the door and they're feeling curious about how they can optimize their fertility journey. They have taken pretty good care of themselves. They don't have any underlying health conditions. You might only need about 120 days to optimize the reproductive tract just by, repleting any nutrients that might be
Mhm.
low, upregulating detoxification processes. But for the most part, the system is robust enough that they're probably already in a fertility state. Uh, Whereas if there's other folks who maybe are well into their fertility journey, have tried conventional methods, maybe IUI has been unsuccessful, IVF has been unsuccessful, so they've really moved through the process and they're still not getting the results they'd like. That to me speaks to taking a pause and taking stock of that bigger picture. And then sometimes that timeline can be maybe that's 6 months, maybe that's a year to
Mhm.
start to regulate some of that foundational physiology. So I'd say quite a wide range. I don't know if that's right, like the answer you're looking for, but yeah, how does
No, but
that
it's,
land?
it's it's good to know that perspective, because see, from an Ayurvedic perspective, we look at cleansing and detoxification of the body, and sometimes, the timeline is almost like even a year, right? So if somebody comes to me actively that, oh, I'm going to start trying in the next month, and I can help with herbs to support fertility, but like a month is too short for like anything,
Mm,
detoxification, especially if they have not so great lifestyle. So it's good to know that 120 days is, so okay, 3 months at least, okay, you're thinking about it, you want to optimize your health, but at least give yourself those 3 months, to
yeah.
talk about it, or rather 4 months. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
120 days is good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And for some people, they've been on birth control for a
yeah.
long time. And so some people's physiology can recover quickly from that, and other people can take 6 months, a year, even 2 years to get their hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis back in sync after birth control. So there's wide variation in how quickly people can rebound from that. So that's also kind of, I'd say, a caveat to the planning phase, is thinking about if you have been chemically augmenting your that central axis of your hormones with the pill or a shot or a patch or a NuvaRing or whatever,
Mhm.
that's going to be something to consider.
Okay. And what factors can impact fertility? So you mentioned either nutrient status or you mentioned the HPA axis, but are there any other factors, or what factors do you assess, when clients come to you for fertility?
Mm, okay, so what do I think about? That would be back to those baseline functionality. So the organs of detoxification become very important for people's fertility journey. So that's the whole digestive tract, the liver, the kidneys, the skin. Those kind of work together along with the lymphatics to function as, and we call them the emunctories. I don't know if there's a term in Ayurveda for this cluster of organs that facilitate detoxification, but that's such an important grouping of physiology for fertility. So that can be assessed through clinical signs and symptoms, as well as some liver function panels.
Mhm.
Uh, Insulin and fasting glucose gives you a snapshot of the liver, and then also spills into some of that liver hormonal axis with the metabolism. And we also do a form of hydrotherapy, and we do urine analysis before and after, and that can give us a sense of how kidneys are able to adapt to an increased toxin load. So we can see how that's shifting, and if it's not shifting in a good way, then we're realizing, okay, the whole detoxification system needs some support. So that would be that cluster. Other things like let me see. So, oh yes, the whole stress system, that's something that also can be evaluated. Honestly, even a simple sodium, potassium, like blood level, can give you a snapshot if that's out of range. So there's a ratio that you'd like to see sodium and potassium in the blood. And if that's not right, then that points to an acute stress syndrome and that aldosterone is not working super great. So then that might give us the sense, okay, let's do a further analysis. And so you can do a wide variety of different things for stress testing. There's can be salivary panels, there could be a urine panel. So that's another piece that you could take a look at, is that that stress nervous system. How are the adrenals functioning? And then lastly, the more typical is like the function of the hormones. So that could be through blood, that could be through urine, that could be through saliva, lots of different ways to evaluate the functionality of the hormones. And I like to take a scope that's pretty wide to see what exactly is happening when we follow things all the way through the chain. So sometimes a dry urine, something like a Dutch analysis, can be really useful when we're like, okay, I'm really not getting a sense of what exactly your hormones are doing. Let's see all the metabolites
Mhm.
and follow it through here. And so those would be a few of the different ways that we could assess from a pretty objective kind of lab-based thing.
Mhm. What about environmental toxins? Like, how do they impact you? Or
Mm.
how do you test for those? Yeah.
That's a great question. Environmental toxicology is so important for a fertility journey. I don't think I could emphasize that enough. I think that there is not enough dialogue about how environmental toxic load impairs fertility. And we know this in various different kinds of ecosystems. We know amphibians, fish, other mammals, birds, fertility rates basically plummet when the environmental toxic load increases. And we are no different than that. And so sometimes when fertility is very hard to achieve, we can look right away to the toxic load. So assessing the toxic load, you can do that from a different perspective. So clinical signs and symptoms, I find, are important no matter what we're assessing, because certain toxicants will have different profiles. So you'll have
Mhm.
different signs and symptoms associated with different toxicants. There's so many out there. Heavy metals, for example, PCBs, different inorganics, solvents, they all have their different profiles of how they might interrupt physiology. So we kind of have in the back of our mind these different profiles of different toxicants and how they show up for us. If you're specifically looking at toxic metal loads, there's two pretty common ways to assess that. You can do that through a provoked urine test, or you can do that through a hair tissue sample. And there are some serum or blood testing for different environmental toxins. Those are usually pretty expensive, and usually you need a medical doctor on board to be able to write some of those. So I would say those are less common to go in that direction. And getting just a robust understanding of what are these toxicants, where are they coming from, and what you can do about it. And that's, to us at the Health Creation Lab, such an important piece, because there's so much that you can do just by learning about how to clean up your environment. So
And
that's
that,
air. Sorry.
sorry, that was my next question. What should one look for, or how to identify those? So if you could elaborate on those, that would be fantastic.
Totally. So we actually, in a nutshell, we put all of that information in a course called the Holistic Detox course, and that's on our website. You can read about it. It's a ton of information that we've condensed into videos, handouts, et cetera, et cetera. So it's super accessible, ready for instant download. So that's like if someone is super curious and they want to get right into it. But on the short of it, we look at key areas. So there's the food and kitchen, there's air, there's water, there's personal care products or hygiene products, and drugs. And I'm probably missing a category, but that's the majority of them. And so we like to look at like, what are the common pollutants in those? So for example, the air is really interesting. Sometimes the air inside a home can have, is like less clean than the air outside, which is kind of surprising for some people to hear, just because of how we build homes now. There's not a lot of airflow, and so all of these things that are off-gassing in our homes, they put all these solvents, they just are right in the air. So something like an air filter, or the water, a water filter. So filters of various descriptions become very useful. Something like the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen is an amazing place to start for people who are curious about how to reduce maybe pesticide and herbicide residues on food. And then certain drugs cause certain nutrient depletions. That's interesting. So lots there to explore. I don't know if there's something specifically that I could speak to. I guess I'm being kind of general.
No, but there is a lot, like probably we could do like a session on this itself where we talk for hours on, what exactly are environmental toxins. So for everybody watching this, in the description of this video itself, you'll find a link to the healthcreationlab.com. And when you go onto the website, you can purchase the Holistic Detox course right there. For those of you who are watching this live, say a quick hi. If you have any questions about Whole Person Fertility Journey or naturopathic medicine as well, we have Dr. Chelsea Dakers right here, and we can ask her all the questions we want today, right? So most definitely, let us know you're watching this live, and please post your questions as well. One thing that I have seen, here is like there is no preparation for conception, so there is absolutely like suddenly you're like, okay, I think I'm settled in life, I would like to have a baby, and then that's how, so there is no preparation. So what kind of preparation, if somebody comes to you maybe like 4 months earlier, what are some things you would suggest the person to prepare on like a physical mental plane as well, not just physically optimizing, but from a mental perspective as well? Is there something they can add or something they have to take out of their lives?
Yeah, great question. So you're so right. Our like North American culture and maybe other cultures, we just are like, oh, I want to get pregnant. And then instantly it's just like, oh, and now I'm not pregnant. Why is that? It's so interesting that our culture relates to fertility in that way, because I know, for example, from a Chinese culture, both Mason and I, we're both naturopathic doctors at the Health Creation Lab. We both have a strong interest in traditional Chinese medicine, and from what we understand, like there's this robust understanding of how to prepare to get pregnant and to conceive. And so it's so interesting to contrast that to the North American perspective, which is like exactly what you said, just basically no preparation. So there's one resource that I would love to recommend. It's called Awakening Fertility. And it's an amazing resource. The woman who wrote it started a food collective called Mother Bees. You can follow them on Instagram. And so she merges traditional Chinese medicine with like the fertility journey, and it's an amazing resource. It's a book. And so that would be something that I would recommend to anyone who's considering like just in the planning stages. And there's so many good lifestyle stuff. There's a lot there about the mental and emotional preparation. And then she has some great recipes as well on the back. So I love that resource. And I'd say that some form of detoxification, whether that's choosing to reduce the environmental toxic load, or maybe doing like some kind of a cleanse that's individualized depending on how everybody's body's doing. Like for most people, like liver, gallbladder usually can do some support, or the colon, something in there you might want to consider, because we do know that the placenta and the fetus actually they become a place for the mom to actually detoxify. So like if she does have an increased metal load or an increased environmental toxic load, some of those like chemicals, they actually get put into the placenta and the fetus as a way to detoxify. And same with the breast milk. So know that we can prepare a little bit and prioritize some form of detoxification prior to getting pregnant, so you know that you've moved some of the stuff that's in your system before you make a baby. So that would be something I'd really recommend. And so you could do that through food. I know that you're totally an expert in all the kinds of seasonal cleanses. So something, maybe the time of year is important to consider in that. And so that would be something. And then, okay, so we talked about that. And then I think for like the mental, emotional piece, like maybe considering where there is space in your life for another being. So I think that because people can tend to like just jump into this idea of wanting a baby, but there might actually be no space in their life for another being. And just imagining what that would look like. Like, for example, if someone's a person who like gets up in the morning, has a really quick morning, they're eating on the go, they don't really sit down to eat, they don't prioritize a lunch hour. To me, that's like a very tight schedule. And kiddos, they need to be fed, they need to be entertained, they need love, and that all takes a lot of time. And so to start to imagine spaces in your life where you could just create little opportunities for points of connection. So maybe that's starting to build in a routine where you sit down and you eat a wonderful breakfast with your partner every day. And maybe you cultivate that in your lunch hour or something in the evening, and you start to create these little pockets for moments of connection. And then it's more easy to imagine and incorporate a whole other human being in your life.
No, that's a really good point. And sometimes, like the fertility journey by itself can be stressful for people, and that itself can create the stressors in the relationship, right? So I think that's a great point, to have times where you're connecting with your partner first, and inviting or creating that space to invite someone, and so that's really a great point. And you're big on following the wisdom of the body, right? Like, I know we've had a lot of talks before, and you're like, okay, your body knows naturally how to do this, but just get out of your own body, get out of your own mind. So how can one do that, because our body has this innate intelligence, and everybody 100% tries to interfere with it, right? So
It's so true. Oh, it's so true. Yes.
So how do you follow the wisdom of the body, or how do you connect with your body? Because this was something very easy when we did not have as many possessions. Right now, we're more connected to our phones than what's happening inside, you know?
Mm. Oh, so true. Yeah, I think that's such a good starting point right there is like, what are all like, where do you give your time? Where is your attention? Noticing who and what gets your attention. And you're so right. It's like, this gets my attention. This computer gets my attention. You know, technology really gets a lot of our attention. So that's a great starting place is noticing where your attention is, and that can even be enough to spark some epiphanies. It's like, oh wow, I've spent 10 hours on my laptop today. You know, I've spent 2.5 hours on my phone today. And you don't even have to, I would say at the beginning of that journey, you don't even have to do anything about it, but just giving yourself permission to notice where your attention is. And I think honestly, because there is that internal wisdom, usually once you start to calibrate and reassess your attention, you'll start to prioritize a little bit differently. It's like this natural thing that just kind of emerges. And I really think it is that internal wisdom being like, oh, yeah, that is true. I just spent an entire day on my laptop. I probably could do something else. And without even really trying, maybe you will. So that's maybe a beginning of the journey is noticing. And then I love embodiment and somatic practices. And what that means to me is starting to build an awareness, a skill set of how do we feel in our body? And then we can use that to leverage habits, choices, next moves. So I think when we're in like the hustle mode, there's a lot of like automatic behaviors, thoughts, etc. going on. It's kind of just like autopilot. And we get really wrapped up in autopilot. And so if we're in autopilot in such a way that we're not really honoring our own internal cues, kind of like a car, you know, you get like the oil lamp light and you're like, oh, low in oil, need to get an oil change. We have those too. Like we definitely have those indicators, but if we're moving at warp speed, it's really hard to pick up on those things. So I would say this opportunity within the pandemic is to slow down for those of us who have had the privilege to do so, to slow down and take it down a notch from the warp speed and notice how am I feeling in my body. And that can be as simple as a body scan for folks who have no idea where to start, like literally eyes open or closed, mind's eye, doing a scan from the top of the body, head, neck, shoulders, all the way down into the feet, and noticing inside the mind, just like, oh, there's tension in my scalp. My jaw is tight. I have tightness in my chest. Oh, interesting. I feel a bit bloated in my digestion. Doing a scan. And that can be a really beautiful place to be like, oh, hey, I'm getting so much data from my body. And then it's like that part where you choose to start to listen. I think that's a gateway to that internal, that innate wisdom of the body.
Oh, and that's so true. You know, we don't sit down and listen to these signs, you know, and often when we talk to our, you know, patients, we'll ask them, okay, how long have you had this? Oh, I don't know, right? Oh, maybe, you know, 6 months, maybe longer. So those maybes, you know, is that they need more connection with themselves. So, you know,
Yes.
really good point to constantly check in with yourself. A simple body scan is a great tool that you mentioned that people can do on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going back to your practice, you know, so how I know you work with a lot of fertility clients. So, how can naturopathic medicine help with fertility? And the second part to the same question is like, how do you, you know, help your clients as well with naturopathic medicine?
Okay. So how does naturopathic medicine and
Medicine help.
why?
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Okay.
your approach, which is even more specific than the big naturopathic medicine, right? So, yeah.
Okay, honing in. Okay. Okay, so naturopathic medicine here, what I think is unique about our approach here at the Health Creation Lab is that we are informed by this lineage of elders, which is pretty old school, which actually really sinks into that fundamental understanding that we have the capacity to heal. So that it seems kind of maybe superficial, but that deep understanding, that philosophical understanding, actually leverages through all of our therapeutics. So we are using therapeutics that allow that healing capacity to do its work. And sometimes our job is to just get things out of the way. Just removing barriers to the fertility journey. It could be that simple, because some of the modalities that we work with, they're not suppressive in nature. So, like, for example, something that is starts with the word anti. So say antihypertensive or like blood pressure lowering medication. They, anti as in stop the hypertension. So when something starts with the word anti, there's the backstory is that something is being impaired. Usually it's an enzyme system is being impaired, so this symptom of high blood pressure comes down. So we work very little with therapeutics that have that intentionality behind it, because what we're actually trying to do is not stop symptoms, but we're actually trying to upregulate your innate physiology. So your innate detox capacity, your innate capacity to regulate your nervous system. So we're using specific tools like herbs, homeopathy, food, hydrotherapy, acupuncture, etc., in a way that allows that natural capability to heal. And so that's one way of practicing naturopathic medicine. Not everyone does it in that style. So I'd say that's our unique approach. And like I said, that's been informed because of the mentors that we've had in our career. We've gravitated to a lot of elders in the naturopathic field. And so they have gifted us some very, very old school tools, which we are excited to share with everybody, because they have huge impact, but they're pretty gentle. So that would be our more specific, like who we are and what we do. And then me personally, what I bring to the table for folks in a fertility journey is I think I can help people prioritize. So I think what can happen in a fertility journey, especially folks who have been pretty deep into the conventional system, they are pretty stressed out and they're pretty traumatized. It's a really, really rigorous program to go through something like IVF.
Yeah.
They're intense, really intense. And so folks who have been through that process come out the other side without a baby. They're usually feeling hopeless, and they're feeling, well, they might even not be able to verbalize it, but I see them as being traumatized by the whole experience. And so I think that me being who I am, I like to start slow and gentle and honor where they're at and allow them the space to start to heal and remember that they have the capacity to heal. Because somewhere along that fertility journey, a lot of people lose the faith in their own capacity to be well. Somewhere in there, it gets just squished. And I think part of what I do is help people remember that they can be well. Even like, it's kind of like almost like being a cheerleader. Like I can lean into so supported that I know people have the capacity to heal, and I can pass that along. And that, I think, makes a big difference in people's journey, because at the beginning, they can't hold that for themselves.
Oh, that's amazing. And where can people find you?
Oh, we can be found online. So thehealthcreationlab.com, that's our website. And then both my partner and I have our bios on there. His name's Mason and I'm Chelsea. And you can check out our bios and read about who we are. And we're on Instagram at the Health Creation Lab. And we have an email, which is answers@thehealthcreationlab. So we're around. Oh yeah, we have Facebook, the Health Creation Lab. So thankfully, all the handles are the same, so we're pretty easy to find, and we're open to receiving, questions through any kind of avenue, whether that's a DM or an email or whatever. And for folks who are local, 519-381-8677, you can just give us a shout, send us a text, and yeah, we'll be there.
Oh, that's awesome. And for everyone, I've also shared the website here in the description itself. So definitely you can click on the link, you can book like a, session and chat more about, how you can get supported. So thank you so much, Dr. Chelsea, for, and that's all the time we have. I would love to have you back here and we
Mhm.
can talk about any different topic that you specialize in. I always love, interviewing the experts, learning something new every time I do a Saturday interview. Just last week, somebody was like, "Why don't you talk on all the topics? I'm sure you can talk." And I'm like, "No, but I don't want to. I want to listen to what people have to say and what they bring to the table, or because I'm always learning too, right? So this is always interesting for me to see what all the practitioners are doing, and I can learn as well. So
Yeah.
this has been really interesting. Thank you so much for being here, and hopefully we'll see you soon again. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much, Manjuri. Such a nice time to spend with you. You're very good at this. I love
Oh, thank
chatting
you.
with you. You have a natural ability to just can't keep the dialogue moving. So thank you so much.
Thank you.